Okay, Scott, so I wanted to touch on what Doug Brooks said about franchising, because this is his area of expertise, I think, franchising. Now, I think where this becomes interesting, and me and you have a difference of opinion on this, because you think that, franchising has nothing to do with MLMs, whereas my take is that when people like my father got into MLMs and were, being brainwashed and convinced, they were being told that you are buying a franchise. This is a very, very cheap franchise. What was the story that was sold to my father and that he bought into wholeheartedly was that he was basically buying a business that was almost identical to a McDonald's or a KFC or a Burger King, but it was cheaper than those franchises and it had more potential than those franchises. They will talk about how for a couple of $100 you could earn more money than a McDonald's franchisee. You could do less work than the McDonald's franchisee, and that there was just so much more potential. They would compare the money that Dexter Yeager made out of his Amway franchise, and they compare it with McDonald's. And it is so ridiculous. So that's why I think that Doug Brooks' insights on franchising and how it's different to MLMs is very, very important. What do you make of that, Scott?
Well, I think there's very little similarity between franchise and MLMs.
I agree, but that's not what the new recruits are being told.
Well, that's what they were not being told in the past. I believe that Amway came in and told those groups to stop using Amway and making connections to franchises because that was happening many years ago, probably going on 20 or 30 years ago. Some of the groups, I think Worldwide was using that as a comparison, versus a franchise. And Amway came in and shut that down. They said, nope, we are not a franchise. Do not use that language. And so, to my knowledge, again, that doesn't mean it's just that they were told not to do it.
Could you send me some information on that? I'd be actually interested to see that that, and I'll actually put it on my channel if you can show me, because I remember actually, I think it was in about 2005, maybe 2006. My dad was told by his upline, there's a franchise festival in Melbourne. You need to get tickets to it. It's very, very important that you get tickets to it. And I remember my dad getting home with this big franchise booklet, and he's like, look at all these franchises. $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million. My franchise has got more potential than these franchises. My franchise requires less work, less commitment, and has the potential to earn far more money. And he was then comparing the potential of the McDonald's franchise and the KFC franchise and the Subway franchise with his franchise that he'd bought for a couple of $100. And he was laughing at how stupid everybody else was at this franchise fair who was buying these, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million franchises. He truly believed that he had signed the franchise deal of the century. He thought that he was so much smarter and that the Amway franchise was so much better than these other franchises. What do you make of that, Scott?
That's going on 20 years ago now, so that was happening, and this was in the United States that I'm talking about, so I don't know, what Amway's position in places like Australia, using the term franchise. It could be just a different set of laws. It's not as big of a problem using the comparison in Australia versus doing it in the United States. So there's a lot that I don't know about that. I really don't have much of an opinion.
Well, I mean, you say that Amway told people to stop doing it, but I mean, these corporations have also told their distributors to stop making exaggerated income claims. And we saw in Marco's Primerica video, the lady literally said, you cannot say I make $500,000 a year. And within 5 seconds, she pulled out these booklets that showed the $1 million earners. I mean, she couldn't even go 5 seconds. She's saying you can't do it, and then she did it herself. So just because the Amway Corporation sends out some letters to its distributors saying you can't call it a franchise, that doesn't mean they're not doing it. And I would bet my bottom dollar that today in America, Australia, Canada, Great Britain, it's happening everywhere. They're still calling it a franchise. They're still saying that the McDonald's franchise is overpriced. The Subway franchise is overpriced. The Amway franchise is an absolute bargain. This is the greatest opportunity you're ever going to get. This is the deal of the century. This is the cheapest franchise with the highest potential of anything out there. So that's how I see it. I've got no doubt it's still going on today. And yeah, I know I can tell you in, I think it was 2005, every single Amway distributor in Australia was encouraged to go to these franchise fairs, and they were told, hey, look at what you're getting for a couple $100, look at what they're getting. And my dad was laughing at them. He thought it was hysterical that these idiots, these fools, these ignorant fools were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars on franchises when he had one for a couple of $100. And when he used to I've told you, Scott, in the past of how he used to prospect in the taxi. He would even take this franchise fair booklet and he'd say, look at this franchise. And he'd point them out one by one and say $500,000, $1 million, $2 million. I've got a franchise for you that's better than that, has more potential than that. And it's a fraction of the price. I mean, do you find it amazing that he actually believed that his Amway franchise was as valuable as a McDonald's?
Well, I would just question his judgment because, to my knowledge, he's lost money every single year he's been in Amway. So, when you consider that most franchisees actually make money,
yep,
and most MLMers lose money.
But this was early in the game, though. This was early in the game. This was when he'd only been doing it for 4 years, and that, he hadn't made money for 4 years, but that was because he'd made errors. And he was going to rectify those errors. His big line was that his biggest problem was that he'd been wasting too much time on losers. He'd wasted too much time trying to help losers. Who these people were, they were ignorant, they were unmotivated, they were lazy, and that's why they had joined him and then they'd quit. It wasn't because of a flaw in the Amway business, it was because they were lazy, negative losers. So that was I remember him saying, I'm going to stop wasting so much time on losers, I'm going to start concentrating on winners. Because that's how diamond ships are built. They're built when you help winners. You don't waste time with negative losers. But here we are, almost 2 decades later, still has not sponsored a diamond. And yeah, correction too, he made money for a small period of time. He was making at one point about $4,000 a month or $1,000 a week. And he was taught that was the equivalent of a $1 million asset. And the way they came to that, Scott, was that in order to earn $1,000 a week, you would need to have $1 million in a bank to earn that much money in interest. What do you make of that for a?
Well, that is true. If you want to preserve your principal, most financial advisors would tell you that you should not remove more than somewhere between 4 and 5% of your investment on an annual basis. Otherwise, you run the risk of decreasing your principal, and then you don't have as much.
Yeah, I think you're missing the point though, Scott. What he was being told was that he had his Amway business was the equivalent of having, say, $1 million of cold hard cash in the bank, and it was guaranteed to continue to pay him $1,000 a week forever. Now the problem was that literally within weeks of that, everybody in his group started to quit. So that $1,000 a week went to zero very, very quickly because everybody quit because the people that were buying the products and doing what he was telling them to do weren't making any money, so they then quit. So to compare a $1,000 a week income in Amway to a $1 million in the bank is ludicrous because $1 million in the bank is going to be in that bank no matter what happens. There's no event that could change that and remove that $1 million from the bank. Being in Amway, your income is constantly up and down depending on what other people do. He had no control over what the members of his group did. I mean, they were all almost certain to quit because the data tells us that the 99.7% are going to lose money. So the odds of him being able to keep that group together they were astronomical, weren't they? You'd need to be a mathematician to figure it out. That's how complex and how unlikely it was that $1,000 a week was going to continue long term. It was highly, highly unlikely, but in his mind, he thought it was certain that he was going to have at least $1,000 a week forever.
Well, that's what his upline was telling him, and his upline is known liars. Like all the uplines in Amway are known liars. So once you realize the upline and the corporation are known liars, then there's no reason to believe that. Started with the money, and they told him that. It's kind of reasonable to believe it until it goes away, and then he learned that, it's not forever.
Well, he learned that, but he won't. He continues to blame the negative losers who were in his group and who quit. He calls them negative losers. They got a broke mindset. They're negative. Just anything. All these ridiculous insults that he's giving them. When the reality is that they were the smart ones. They were the ones with the open minds who had critical thinking skills.
It's his upline telling him to call that.
Yep.
The upline is behind all of that sort of approach. It's not your dad. It's the upline, and it just parrots what they say.
Yep.
And they tell him that to keep him in because they want to keep him in. And so it's all their strategy. It's an evil genius. I've said that many times. It's an evil genius, the way these guys operate. So it's that's how it's working. And if people don't start complaining about it, it's going to keep going.
Absolutely. But I think we're getting a bit off topic. I think the reason why I've said all that is to emphasize the point of why it's important Doug Brooks' knowledge of franchises, and he's pointed out how they're very different to MLM companies. That's why I think his insights here in this video were very, very important. But you don't agree. You think, what do you make of what he said about franchises?
I just think that franchises and MLM are so different that it's like comparing water polo to NASCAR races. They're just different.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what you just said, but it is important when you've got people saying this is a franchise to get a franchise expert in and say, no, it's not. And these are the reasons why. These are the reasons why an MLM franchise is nothing like an MLM. And to call an MLM a franchise is ridiculous. And frankly, if someone says that, they either are being extremely dishonest or they are extremely ignorant. There's no, if someone tells you that a McDonald's is the same as an MLM franchise, and an MLM, they're either ignorant or they're being dishonest. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yep.
They're completely different.
So is there anything that you agreed with what Doug Brooks had to say to Marco? Because I thought it was an outstanding interview, and I think it's a tragedy that so few people have watched it. I remember seeing it and thinking, this video is going to be seen hundreds of thousands of times. I remember just thinking it was fantastic, and then I looked today and it's only had about 16,000 views. I'm astonished that so few people have watched it, because I feel like there's a lot of videos on Marco's channel that aren't quite as good as this one that have got far, far more views. So I was quite disappointed that so few people watched it, but yeah, what did he say? What did he get right, do you think? Or did you just think he got nothing right?
Well, it's been a while since I've watched it, so to remember particular points of that video, but I'm not surprised it didn't get very many views because, it's kind of like a legal discussion, and most people just want to be entertained. They want to see Marco doing all of his weird stuff, and that's how he gets his views. It's not serious discussions. So whether Brooks was right or wrong really is almost immaterial, because bottom line was it was a legal discussion, and most people that watch Marco find that boring, and so they just don't watch it. They want to. It's just That's just who Marco attracts.
Yeah, I think you're being very unfair on Marco's audience. I've got no doubt. I can tell by the comments in the comment section. There's some very, very good comments in Marco's lives. You've met. You haven't met, but we agree that Mad Dog is a very, he's a very smart person. Do we agree on that?
No,
You don't like Mad Dog?
I didn't say I didn't like him.
Okay.
You asked me if he's a person.
Okay.
That's different than not liking.
How do you rate his knowledge of MLMs then, out of 10?
I'd give him about a 3.
A 3, okay. How do you rate his just general intelligence? Because I have him picked as a guy that's very, very intelligent, articulate. Yeah,